Welcome to our Israel-Palestine podcast, a project by graduating high school students from Berlin-Neukölln, home to Germany's largest Palestinian diaspora, and a second home to many young Israelis. Israel and Palestine are painfully present in our district and in our schools. We've spoken with historians, legal scholars, trauma researchers, and educators, some of whom are world-leading experts to better understand this ongoing conflict. Our approach has been multi-perspectival. We don't aim to resolve controversies or contradictions, but to hear different perspectives. Human rights and international law are the foundation of responsible multi-perspectivism. Can we learn to listen and hold conflicting truths at the same time? Find your own answers, or better, questions. Are you ready for the discomfort of learning?
Welcome to a very special episode of our student-led podcast series on Israel and Palestine. I'm Mert.
And I'm Efe.
In this first chapter on the human reality, we bring together voices whose lives were deeply affected by the conflict. Today, we are honored to speak with Khalil Sayegh. A very warm welcome. Mr. Sayegh, we are very excited to have you.
Also for me, a very warm welcome. It's honored to meet you. Thank you so much for the gift of your time.
Of course. Thank you, guys. It's great meeting you both and looking forward to the conversation.
Khalil Sayegh is a Palestinian Christian born and raised in the Gaza Strip in a refugee family. He lived through the Second Intifada, the 2008 Gaza War, and the rise of Hamas. His personal journey took him from Gaza to the West Bank and eventually to Washington, D.C. He is one of the most prominent Gazan voices in the U.S., described by the Parliament of the World's Religions as having a deep-rooted passion for justice and peace. His quest for truth led him to a view in which he deeply empathized with Palestinians and Israelis, as the Jewish Federation recognized. An outlook that underscored his voice as a powerful emergent moral leader. Khalil Sayegh brings a rare clarity shaped by personal experience, conviction, and lifelong commitment to dialogue. As a political analyst, he has contributed to the BBC, the Economist, the Wall Street Journal, CNN, and the French newspaper Le Monde and La Croix.
Khalil Sayegh holds a bachelor degree in biblical studies from Bethlehem Bible College and a master's in comparative politics from American University in Washington, D.C., where he focused on democratization and political violence in the Middle East. He's the founder of the Agora Initiative, a nonprofit committed to mobilizing the global community to seek viable solutions to the Israel-Palestine conflict based on equal human rights for all, ensuring security and prosperity for both Palestinians and Israelis.
Today's conversation will explore Khalil's personal history. He will give us rare insight to the human realities in the Gaza Strip before and after October 7th and share his views on the current protests against Hamas, the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and his vision for a shared future. The devastating violence we are facing since October 7th is also deeply personal for him. He lost his 18-year-old sister Lara and his father Jerry's during the war. We want to start this conversation by expressing our heartfelt condolences for the loss of your sister Lara and your father Jerry's, Mr. Sayegh. This is very personal, of course. If you feel comfortable, would you like to share with us about your sister and father and the painful loss?
Sure. Yeah. It's unfortunate that we have to start the podcast with that, right? Because it has been one of the deepest, saddest experiences I've had. Unfortunate reality is that this unfolding genocide in Gaza have stolen a lot of my friends, family members, and relatives, as well as memories and places that I had so much memories with, and it's all wiped off. My father was killed in December 21st, 2023, while sheltering at the Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza. The way he was killed is through medical prevention. At that time, the Israeli tanks were surrounding the church, didn't allow ambulances or doctors into the church, and at the same time, they have destroyed every single functioning clinic or hospital in Gaza City at the time where my father was located. We don't know what happened, whether it's a heart attack or panic attack, but he passed away, and we couldn't know because there are no doctors. And then my youngest sister, Laura, was killed as she was walking from the north to the south in her last day in Gaza, and supposedly moving to Egypt after we have managed to get the permission, etc. And on her way to the south, she was forced to walk about 8 miles with my mom, because that's the way Israel forced everyone to walk from the north to the south in order to travel. And on the way, she collapsed. And obviously, no ambulances are allowed there as well. No cars, donkeys, or anything to move them. My mom also collapsed, and she had a coma for 2 days. She survived, but my sister was dead. That's how it happened.
So it's very sad. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. Sayegh, can you take us back to your early years? You were born in a refugee family. What is the history of the large refugee population in Gaza?
Yes, I was born and raised in Gaza City to a refugee family originally from Majd. Majd is a city located southern part of historical Palestine, a little bit to the north of Gaza Strip, is the Gaza Strip. Back then it wasn't like the Gaza Strip was a constructed thing, because the Gaza Strip was constructed after the Nakba in 1948. It had these borders, but before that it was an entire area of the southern part of Palestine, so not far from Gaza. My family has lived in Majd for years, and when 1948 war happened, my family were forced to leave. And Majd has a unique, sad story, because some people left and other people stayed in Majd, and those who stayed in Majd were ethnic cleansed later on by the mayor of the new city that was founded there, that's called Ashkelon. In 1952, they kicked out the rest of the people. And like the rest of Palestinian refugees, my grandparents have experienced the exile and then experienced the loss of their property, because Israel has passed laws such as the absentee property law, which literally means that every Palestinian who left or was forced to leave, ethnic cleansed, his or her property will be confiscated by the state. So my grandpa has to live through this deep pain in Gaza, where he's witnessing with his own eyes that the loss of his property, the loss of his home, the loss of his homeland. And I was born to this, generation of generational trauma and generational grievances. And when you're born to a refugee family, you could see how it impacts your political, social, economical situation. My grandpa never lived in a refugee camp. He was one of the fortunate ones, because he was a jewelry maker, came to Gaza with some gold, and started his business right away. So we lived in the upper class sort of refugee community, yet nonetheless, you still could see it. You still could see it with the disparity with property. You could see it with other ways that it impacted you. And we've always, felt the same feeling that the poet Mahmoud Darwish describes, is that before 48, Palestinians used to live in the Garden of Eden. And what happened in 1948, it's like the fallen from the Garden of Eden. And the Palestinians in the exile and refugee camps and the new cities that they have inhabited are waiting and belonging for that restoration of the Garden of Eden, just like humanity is waiting for the restoration of heaven, or the Garden of Eden, like before the fall. And that's, I feel, a feeling that I grew up with. I grew up with grievances, pain, and really belonging to this picture, almost a romantic picture that my grandparents have drawn for us about what life used to be before 48, in terms of not only economy, but social fabric, the society, the way the town of Majd, everyone knows each other. All of these things, I think, contributed to my growing up as a refugee.
Thank you very much. What was it like growing up as a Christian in Gaza? What shaped your earliest memories back then?
So in Gaza, there is a very small Christian community. My family happened to be Christian, but we weren't super, entrenched into our religious identity. We were more kind of like a moderate, secular Christian family. And, religion wasn't, always on the table. We felt more Palestinians than Christians. And then, at school, etc., we just felt, you start feeling that you are Christian because all of a sudden you're the kid, maybe the only one in class who had to leave the religious education because it's Islamic and you don't have to take it, so you would leave. And that's, I think, the first conscious understanding of not like everyone else in Gaza, I'm part of the minority, and I start feeling this and not contributing, sort of constructing that part of my identity, that although I'm Palestinian, I'm different because of this one element of my identity, which is being Christian. But we never felt anything off about it, I mean, you'd face something here and there of people being like, oh, you're Christian, you're different or whatever, but never any systematic racism or discrimination or any of these things up until, I think, Hamas came to power in 2007. When Hamas came to power, I don't think that Hamas was willingly targeting the Christians per se. I don't think they've had the interest of that. But I think when Hamas came to power, the Islamization of society that started happening and the Islamization of the public square, such as it's illiberal, start having impact on Christians like myself, because all of a sudden everyone is being Islamized. All of a sudden the measurement of patriotism is how Islamic you are. And this makes people like myself and Christians feel that they are left out. And this also makes people like myself feel they're not welcome in the public square. And for me, as I was a teenager in high school back then, I started facing more harassment at school. My teachers all of a sudden became more Hamas associates, students who became a little bit more religious start becoming more discriminatory as well. So that has felt like a challenge. But as I said, it was never like a systematic thing or like a top down. It was more because of the policies of Islamization. And I think that's the reality of any liberal society. If you're a minority who's living in Hungary today, and as Hungary is taking more and more a liberal take, I think that the minority will feel more and more left out, and there will be more discriminatory actions taken.
How did the rise of Hamas influence your daily life and sense of freedom and fear as a young person in Gaza? You already talked about the things.
As a Christian, I described this turn toward the liberalism has changed. But also not as a Christian, as a Palestinian generally. Hamas was an authoritarian regime. So is the Palestinian Authority beyond them. But Hamas was a unique authoritarian regime in two senses. One sense that it is authoritarian with a revolutionary taste, meaning that they are interested in revolutionizing the society and reshaping the society, remaking it after their own image. And that's a unique thing, because all of a sudden you had Hamas trying to indoctrinate a new way of life, changing the way of life of society. And they're unique in the second way, as an authoritarian, that they're Islamists. And because they're Islamists are Islamists for a reason, right? And part of the Islamist agenda is to Islamize the society. And what do I mean by Islamizing the society? That is not only to Islamize Christians per se, but to make even the Muslims who are there more virtuous. And when you have a government trying to decide what is virtuous, then you start having all sort of trying to shape your way of life. So I remember Hamas trying to intervene early on, and after this they changed, but like early on they tried to intervene of what we wear as men, even not only as women. I mean, obviously they went after the women because that's the case usually. Women are the most targeted usually by these liberal theocratic movements generally, but they went after men, even like myself. What do you wear? What do you put in your hair? How do you look, etc., to make sure you're not westernized, to make sure you think in a certain way. And, there was mass arrests and torture, etc., of anyone who's critical of Hamas. And I happened to be very critical as a young man. And I remember I was detained by Hamas twice, both of which happened before I even turned 15. One time because I was wearing the black and white kufiya, which symbolized nationalism and secular nationalism at that time. Now some of Hamas using it. It wasn't back then. It symbolizes Fatah. It symbolizes, the rivalry of Hamas, which is the secular nationalism and not the Islamist. And I was arrested for that. And second time, I was arrested for claim that I had committed a blasphemy, which was over a debate about religion I've had with an Islamist student. So that fear has become a thing, and it's a fear over criticizing Hamas that people have in general, because they use such a brutal mechanism of really humiliation and torture, such as back then, and they're doing it again now during the war, that they will put you and they will shoot you in your leg. And that's a very painful torture. Many people would wish that they would die rather than have it, because this would leave you paralyzed, will leave you unable to move. So there was an atmosphere of fear for sure.
You lived through the most intense periods of conflict, including the Second Intifada and the 2008 war. What do you remember about those times?
My first memory of the Second Intifada, and it's actually my first memory of the conflict too, I was in my school. And all of a sudden, we've heard the helicopters for the first time in Gaza and the Air Force, and they start bombing. And I remember I was 7 years old back then, terrified, super afraid. And I remember running to my mom and dad after I managed to get from school to home and asking who the hell is doing that. And they said the Israelis. And that was my first time I understood the conflict, I understood the grievances of Nakba and all of that. That was the first time I come face to face with the brutality of the occupation. And what does it mean to be occupied? What does it mean to be bombed ruthlessly by the Israeli occupation? The devastation in Gaza was really horrific. And then, since the Second Intifada, it never stopped. Bombing, the incursion, the invasions never stopped. It continued. Also, we've had the settlers at that time. About 8,000 settlers who are living in Gaza controlled literally the life of about 1 million Palestinians who are, back then we were millions, now we are over 2 millions. Now they control the water, they control the roads. Sometimes I'd go to my school and I remember one of my teachers would not be able to come and the class would be cancelled. And when we asked why, they would say, oh, well, the checkpoint closed. The checkpoint between Rafah and Gaza, for example, Khan Yunis, there was a checkpoint called Abul Hol back then. So that's my first memories of the conflict. And then, we thought things cannot get worse, and it got worse. In 2008, when the first actual, war happened, I remember also I was in my school, and I remember not far from me, it was the graduation of the police academy, where Israel killed 200 people in one missile. And I remember very vividly getting out of the school and having to see the parts of the bodies all over the street, the blood, literally a part of bodies. The bodies were were shredded into pieces. And I had to see these pieces on the ground and going there. It was a terrifying experience. We've lived 30 days not leaving home. The bombardment were everywhere. Now, when you compare it to the genocide today, it feels like nothing, but it was something. It was quite destructive. And we've lost over 3,000 Palestinians back then. It was a horrific incident, the most intense. Now, when compared to today, today is even worse.
Thank you very much for this information. What do you think the outside world misunderstands about life in Gaza and about Gazans in general?
I think the world tend to dehumanize Gazans in so many ways. And I mean the word as a whole. I don't mean only those who dehumanize us from a pro-Israel point of view. Obviously, those are the easiest to dehumanize us, right? Like, we feel dehumanized when they say, oh, they're all terrorists, or they're all Hamas, etc. And we feel like we're being dehumanized, and that the Palestinians are not looked at as multidimensional humans. But also, and I'm careful how to say that, there is the dehumanization that sort of mythologized the Palestinians, put them as a great myths, right? Like, as if we are all heroes in Gaza, and we're all part of a sort of anti-imperial project that would defeat the super imperial powers of the world. And that's also dehumanizing, because it overlooks our emotions, it overlooks our feelings, our humanity as well. And the truth is, what people misunderstand is quite simple. We're just human like you, exactly like you. We have feelings. We are afraid for our kids. We don't want to die for any cause. We don't want to, be dehumanized. We don't want to be stripped of our humanity. We don't want to be bombed. We don't want our children to die in front of us. And I think that's the core of it. And Gaza has complexity. It's a cosmopolitan city. We have a diverse opinions on politics. We have diverse opinion on peace and conflict. We have diverse opinion pretty much on everything. And people want to simplify us and put us in boxes. And I think that's a grave mistake.
You later moved to West Bank and eventually to the US for your studies. How did you experience the situation in the West Bank and what changed for you when you left Gaza?
So I left the West Bank in 2009. And there were two factors of why I left. A, the Israeli siege has devastated Gaza. The economy was crashing. UN was already predicting that in 5 to 10 years, Gaza would be not good for habitation. Water, electricity had issues. So that was one factor. I was only 15, but I would look at the future, and I would see that Gaza did not have future. I understood early on as a teenager that Israel is not going to compromise with Hamas, and Hamas is not going to compromise with Israel, and thus we will be in this prolonged conflict. And it made me decide I want to leave. On the other hand, also, the other factor that pushed me, it was Hamas's authoritarianism, and the fact that they're intervening too much in people's personal lives, etc., also pushed me to a place where I wanted to be in the West Bank. I had imagined in my life, I had imagined in my head, I had thought that it would be better, it would be a bit more liberal, and I would have more freedom. And the truth is, on that level, in the personal freedom, etc., it was a bit better because Hamas is not there. The Palestinian Authority is a little bit more secular. But on the occupation level, it's still there. And I was surprised that the occupation still control your life and you're still living under the boots of the occupation. Yes, there was better water resources there. Yes, there were better electricity where I lived in Ramallah 24 hours as opposed to 6 hours in Gaza. But you're still living under the occupation and you still cannot move from a city to another without the checkpoints. And even more dangerously for me as someone from Gaza, all of a sudden you live under a system that puts your life in danger because you're from Gaza. It's not allowed for you to be in the West Bank, and all of a sudden you're living in fear that at any point, at any time, they can take you back to Gaza. So all these things have become my new experience in the West Bank. Yet at the same time, it was an opening to the war because Gaza was under siege. At least I saw other people, other Palestinians, from Palestinian citizens of Israel. I met with people from Jerusalem. I met people from the rest of historical Palestine. In Gaza, I did not have this experience, and people in the West Bank do not have the experience to meet the Palestinians from Gaza. Many times, I was the first Palestinian from Gaza for people in the West Bank to meet, and vice versa.
Can you tell us about the Agora Initiative? What is it, and why did you create it?
Sure, yeah. So when I was in the West Bank, I was like every other Palestinian, angry, frustrated by the Israeli occupation, the system of apartheid that is there. And I wanted to transform my anger always to a better avenue that would lead to something good. I really believed in the power of dialogue because when I was in the West Bank for the first time, I've talked to Israelis in my life. For the first time, I've seen the world through their eyes. I put myself in their shoes, so to speak, and all of a sudden, it sort of opened my eyes and my mind to a different reality where I start thinking more in terms of coexistence and how can we figure out a way for this conflict to end, for the occupation to end, and for us to live in peace and prosperity together. Yet all the movements I've joined in Israel-Palestine that talks about peace or have dialogue, etc., were always Israeli-led. And we're always Israeli leadership, and the Israelis have the upper hand. And as I came to America and I was studying here, I start feeling more and more the disparity. And even here in Washington, D.C., every group that is Israeli, Palestinian, whatever, always led by an Israeli, always the Israelis have the upper hand. And thus this had its own reflection on the narrative. because the narrative become a bit more Israeli. The power, the dynamic, and in a way I start feeling that we are contributing to the apartheid because dialogue is not helping, and on the other hand, we're translating the apartheid system into the institutional NGOs that exist today. Every NGO you could think of, still the boss is Israeli or Jewish. So I wanted to create something where actual equality exists. I wanted to see Israelis and Palestinians having not dialogue, because I don't like the word dialogue, because there is no dialogue between the occupying power and the occupied, but having a conversation in the US that would lead to resistance to this system and to the occupation. And that's what this Agora is about. It's about providing a platform for people who believe in peace and the possibility of peace, but who believe as a first premise to that the main obstacle for peace is the Israeli occupation, and it's that system of apartheid that exists there. But at the same time, when you recognize that the occupation and the system of apartheid is the main obstacle, I don't think that means that you have to leave all the other actors. It's not like stripping the Palestinians of their agency or even the regional powers, the Iranians, whatever. You could still have all these variables, but the main variable is this one, right? And then you've got these other variables that are sort of impacting the situation, such as Hamas and others. And we are not shying away from calling out Hamas or calling out others. I do this all the time. But I think the main issue here is dealing with the occupation.
Thank you very much for this information. Can you walk us back to October 7? Where were you when you heard about the Hamas attack on Israel? What went through your mind when you heard about that?
You know, when I first started hearing about missiles coming, I thought that's another escalation. That used to happen before. Sometimes it take 2 days, 3 days, sometimes a month. And I thought it would happen and then it would be over. And then when I start seeing videos of trucks getting into Israel, I knew that something really big will happen. And I obviously was terrified. I was here in Washington, D.C., just came back from a trip to actually Tunisia and Jordan for vacation. It wasn't like even, like it was relatively stable time, right? Like I was having a normal life, and I'm back in Washington. I was doing some studies at Catholic University at the time in human rights, international humanitarian law. And then all of a sudden this happens, and I understood that my life would change. Since day one, I understood that. And day two, which is October 8th, my family home in Gaza was bombed. And then the rest is history. My family get killed, my friends, and I keep losing people every day. And it became this really experience that clearly and quickly, within the first few weeks, I started understanding that things are moving toward more a genocidal war than a normal war.
Yeah. How was the trajectory of your family and broader community in Gaza after October 7th?
As I told you, since day one, I was very afraid for my family. On October 8th, my home was bombed. It didn't take a lot, but my family moved to the church. We thought that the church would provide safety, but as you know, the rest is history. The church was bombed on October 19th, and I lost relatives of mine. I was terrified for my family, but they survived. And then, my father died in December 23. So the situation was very clear that it's unsafe for everyone.
How is the situation in Gaza right now? And is it possible to remain in contact with people in Gaza?
The situation is very dire. And yes, we can keep connection with the people there. What people are telling me is that, food is lacking. There is really a problem. There's really a problem of resources and food because of the Israeli siege, or actually not even siege anymore. It's a complete blockade. And there is lack of food. There is lack of resources. And when food is there, the price is extremely expensive because of the dearth of it. And I talk to people, and people are actually hungry, and they're demanding that there will be food. And even those new humanitarian outposts that were started that are not really humanitarian, they're really humiliating and very demeaning to the people to have to go there and go through these checkpoints in order to get some food. A lot of people, especially older people, cannot go because you have to walk sometimes 7, 8, or 20 kilometers to get there, to get this food. And a lot of people choose not to go. Coupled with all of that, there is intensive bombardments all over the Gaza Strip. And on top of all of that, the Gaza Strip space is shrinking and shrinking, such as now only 25% of the Gaza Strip can be used by people to live in, because the rest of that is considered by Israel dangerous areas. And these are areas that people cannot go to.
How do you perceive the international reaction since October 7?
Disappointment. There is constant disappointment by the international community. I thought that this wouldn't keep going for more than a month before the world intervened to do something. But the world did not. The world is watching us as we're being slaughtered and is doing nothing. But I think I have some hope for the people of the world, not the governments. The governments are clearly complicit. A lot of governments are complicit, with some exceptions over South Africa, I think of Spain, Ireland, and others. But the people are with us, I feel. And I look at the streets and I see that people are seeing it. And I look at the public opinion of the world, including that of Germany, by the way. And it's with us, despite that the German government is quite complicit in that. And despite that the German government is even oppressive toward this one thing where freedom of speech and freedom of thoughts is not really allowed anymore.
Yeah. What do you expect from the international community?
I would have expected them to invoke the genocide clause in international law and intervene to stop it, no matter what that takes. And you know what? You don't even need a military intervention to stop it. If you cut weapons and call Israel, especially Mr. Trump here in the US, and say enough is enough, stop it, they'll stop it. Because guess what? It's a state that's depending on the Western support for survival. And if the West tells them to stop it, they'll have to stop it. But they did not.
Do you may have explanation for that, why they didn't stop?
I really don't. I do think at the very beginning it was very clear that what Hamas committed on October 7th was horrific, and no one can deny that, right? War crimes occurred, and it's very awful, and I don't condone it. I've condemned it since day one. And I think that this had its own shock in the Western mind as well, right? It was something so awful that they felt Israel had the right to, quote unquote, defend themselves and do something about it. But I think it took a few months, and then people realized that this is not about self-defense anymore. This is destructive for even the Israelis, not only for the Palestinians, and it's all about the greed of Netanyahu. And thus, I don't have any more an explanation for that, because, the variable that is, because of October 7th and Hamas, it's not really there anymore because of the time. But I think I can give you examples, depends on the countries. For example, in Germany, there is this, entire psychological inheritance of the Holocaust, that because the Holocaust have happened with German hands, inflicted on the Jewish people, the Germans feel that they have obligation always to protect the state of Israel as the Jewish state. That's a German thing. They're always thinking in these terms. In America, there is different parts that can explain that. One of which is the Christian Zionism angle and how it impacted government, but not only government, how it impacted culture in general. Because the culture is quite Zionist in the U.S. because of these, religious ideas that the U.S. was built on to an extent.
We are seeing protests across the world. There was especially unprecedented solidarity on college campuses, but also a worrying rise in anti-Semitism. You have strongly condemned the anti-Semitic attacks in Washington and Monde. What are your feelings about global protests?
It brings me hope that people are protesting for Palestinians, bring me sense of solidarity, makes us feel seen, and we appreciate all of that. What I don't appreciate is when these protests and these movements are being hijacked by bad actors to promote anti-Semitism, as you said, or to promote an extremist ideology such as Hamas's or others that led to 2 attacks on innocent Jews here in Washington, in the US, one in Washington, D.C., where I live, which was very close to home because it's here, right? And it happened to our neighbors. And the second in Boulder. And my sense is that the pro-Palestine movement should have condemned it in a stronger terms and should do more to stop that. And why I say that? Why? I mean, Palestinians or pro-Palestine folks would look at me and would say, well, we're not responsible. Why would you give us that guilt? I'd say, obviously, we're not responsible to an extent, but these people used your name. They said Free Palestine, and they went after, and one of these people, at least the one in Washington, D.C., was part of the pro-Palestine movement. So if someone does something in my name and he was part of my movement, I do feel that there is a moral responsibility on myself to condemn it unequivocally. And I think the pro-Palestine movement should have done that. And I know that the majority of them do condemn it, but they wouldn't say it publicly. Because all of a sudden, we are on this super polarized conversation when each side wants to score points against the other, and each side is not willing to concede to the other that our side does something wrong. Every side thinks our side is perfect, right? And Palestinians would look and would say, well, you're killing people in Gaza. Well, there are this child that was killed by pro-Israel person in Chicago was stabbed to death literally after October 7th. Or many cases of pro-Israel violence against Palestinians, and that's not recognized. Why shall I recognize yours? But as far as I'm concerned, that's not how morality works. Morality works as such as you have to be consistent in all cases. And human dignity and human life should be the priority always.
What are your thoughts about the current protests against Hamas? How are they developing, and do they receive enough support from the pro-Palestinian movement?
So the anti-Hamas protest is not a new thing. It has been happening even before October 7th. And the unfortunate reality before October 7th and today, they're not highlighted enough in the media. They're not talked about enough in the media. And on the West, also the pro-Palestine people are not supporting them enough, which brings me so much sadness, and it frustrates me, it makes me even angry, because I know these people. Some of them are my friends in Gaza, and there are patriotic, proud Palestinians who are just want to see Hamas gone. Because of patriotic reasons, because of the interest of Palestine, because of the interest of the people in Gaza. But there is also the Israeli propaganda trying to use this protest and to legitimize their own attacks on Hamas, and thus they legitimize that genocide, which makes it harder for the pro-Palestine movement to stand with them. So how do we deal with that? I really don't know. I think what needs to happen, the pro-Palestine movement have to use it and frame it as such in light of exactly what it is, because these protests were calling for two things: into the war, anti-occupation slangs against Israel, and into Hamas. And the way they view Hamas, by the way, every single one of them view it as an Israeli asset. They're literally, that's the reference for who's the enemy, who is killing us. And some of those leaders of protest who were arrested, and according to Amnesty International report that was published in May, about 15 people they interviewed that were tortured. One of the people who were tortured, called collaborator, etc., while he's being tortured by Israel, he said, how dare they call me collaborator? All of my family were killed by Israel. So these are people who know what suffering means. Their family were killed, and here they are protesting against Hamas, and comes someone in the West to call them collaborator or whatever. It's a quite shameful thing.
What do you think is often missing in how Europe, especially places like Berlin, talk about the conflict?
I think what's missing is misunderstanding of the historical grievances of the Palestinian people since 1948. There is no way to understand this conflict without understanding what happened in 1948, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians, and the grievances that have emerged from that. If you take this variable off, this cause of it, then it becomes plausible to talk about it as Jews versus Muslims, or as anti-Semitism, or whatever that the Germans are talking. And I think that's the missing part. The Germans are living in such traumatic, horrific experience of the Holocaust, which is obviously horrific, but in the way we became the victims of the victims, as Edward Said has referred to us. We are the victims of the Holocaust right now. And how do you deal with it? I really don't know. I'm not German. I don't know how do you deal with it. How do you strike the right balance of bringing back reparation to the victims and not allowing new victims because of these victims? Because ultimately, we are the victims of the victims. Ultimately, perhaps we're the victims of the victims because the victims are so much traumatized, which is a lot of people argue that, and scholars. So understanding 48, understanding that we've had our own traumatic experience of the Nakba is instrumental and important for the conversation.
Thank you very much. Despite everything, you dedicated your life to peaceful advocacy and democracy, seeking justice and peace. What keeps your hope alive?
I think we have no option but to be hopeful. That's what keeps me hopeful. So many times during this genocide, I feel hopeless, I feel tired, I feel etc. But if you give up to lack of hope, you cannot do anything. Really, you cannot do anything. And what motivates me in this life is that I want to see the next child in Gaza living in peace and not being killed. And how do you stop the next child? How do you stop the next sister from being killed? I don't want to see other sister like my sister being killed. How do you stop the next father from being killed? You need to have hope and you need to be precise in your call for justice and peace. There is no other option. We have to live together in this land. And to live together, we need to destroy the institutional unjust mechanism that enforced on the Palestinians. And that's what gives me hope. What gives me hope is that I have to be hopeful for the next generation to live in peace.
If you could speak to a young Israeli or Jewish person who has only seen Palestinians as a threat, and a young Palestinian who has only known Israel's through occupation, what would you want them both to hear?
Meet the other. I told them, meet the other. Go to their spaces, not as a soldier for the Israelis, not with your gun. And for the Palestinians, it's harder because, it's an apartheid regime where you never are equal. Try to step away from that. Try to get as equal as possible and meet the other. For Palestinians, the only time they meet Israelis is when there are soldiers who dominate their lives. And for Israelis, sometimes, most of the times, not most of the times, always, they meet the Palestinians as the inferior. At a checkpoint where you are the superior, or as a worker that would come to Israel to work under you, you never see them as an educated equal to you. And even if you do, legally, there is no way to view them this way, because the law is structured in such a way that they are less than you. The only time I felt equal to an Israeli was when I walked to the American embassy in 2018. Because you had to stand in the same line, in the same way, the law applies to both of you. Although his passport still gave him more privileges than me, chances to get a visa is higher, but you were treated exactly the same. And then you come to the US and you're treated the same again. Obviously, some folks are trying to change that today. But legally speaking, constitutionally, you're equal with everyone here. And that space of equality, even temporal equality, I think it will open up and it will allow you to see so many things. And we need to create more of these spaces, even if it's outside of Israel-Palestine.
What future do you envision for Palestine and Israel?
A future that's based on justice and fairness, etc. But obviously, ultimate justice cannot be fulfilled, and we have to admit that. So that's why I still advocate for two-state solution on 67 border where Israel and Palestine can live side by side together. Now, every day, we're going farther and farther from this reality. Israel is expanding its settlements, things are being built, etc. And I would remain always open to a one-state reality in which, obviously the apartheid will have to end. But today, the situation as such is that we are far from one state's reality. If we are from one state solution, one state reality is there and it's an apartheid state. But how do we move from a one state reality to an one democratic state? I think it's much harder task than moving from the one state reality we are at right now to two-state solution. Much harder task. And you have to go not only against Israel, but against the entire international community that recognizes this state solution. So I remain hopeful that two states could be possible. And if they're not, then we'll have to work much harder for a one-state solution. But if we end up working toward one-state solution, I think it would take much more years.
What is the one message you would want all young listeners to take away?
I think the message right now at this period, and I mean, we're recording in we're recording in June 2025. So we have to get ceasefire in Gaza. We have to stop this genocide no matter what's the price. That's, I think, the main thing. And after this is done, we need to end the occupation. There is no other way around it. If the occupation doesn't end, we will have, it's inevitable, another October 7th in a few years. We will have another, war in Gaza. We will have more child abuse in the West Bank and more people detained and people killed at checkpoints, etc. There's only one way to resolve that. We need to end the occupation and ensure peace between the both people.
Mr. Sayegh, thank you so very much for taking the time and sharing such deeply personal and painful experiences of your life. We're just honored to have you here as a guest. Thank you.
Willie, thank you very much for taking the time. It's an honor to meet you and had this conversation. Willie, it's not normal to have the opportunity to speak with you right now. It's really, wow.
Thank you for having me, both of you, and good luck on your podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. If this conversation was meaningful or unsettling, if it left you with answers or more questions, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. See you next time on our Israel-Palestine podcast.